Hey folks, it's Kaylee and welcome back to Hippie in a Suit, where I talk about sustainability because I dream of a world where teenagers don't have to bear the burden of calling out world leaders for not doing their jobs.
Zero by 2050, blah, 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 net zero, blah, 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 climate neutral, blah, blah, blah.
I am sure you have heard that we have a huge climate change conference coming up next week, which of course is COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland. I know many of you are very interested in climate change, so I thought I would take today's video to give you a quick background of what a COP is, highlight some of the big issues that are on the table for this particular COP, and also give you a bit of my perspective on where things are going. Spoiler alert, I'm not that optimistic at this stage. Anyway, there is a lot to cover on this one, and I'm filming this before work, so let's not waste time. Let's dive right in. COP stands for Conference of the Parties and is a broad term used in international relations to describe the structured, periodic decision-making meetings of all parties to a multilateral agreement or convention. For climate, COP refers to the gatherings of the countries that are part of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC. The climate COP gathers every single year unless the parties agree otherwise, usually sometime in November or December, and there are also pre-meetings referred to as subsidiary bodies, or SBs, that happen in the lead up to a COP. The primary purpose of a climate COP is to review and monitor implementation issues related to the Paris Agreement and to negotiate any administrative or institutional items, but in actuality, COPs also function as a global gathering of the broader climate community. Climate COPs have been taking place since 1995, and some key milestones over the years have included the negotiation of the Kyoto Protocol, which happened in 1997 in Japan, and of course reaching the Paris Agreement, which was the outcome of COP21 in Paris in 2015. The next COP, which of course is COP26, will take place October 31st to November 12th in Glasgow, Scotland, and is arguably the most important conference of the parties since Paris. This is because a large number of important implementation issues need to be decided on urgently to support the implementation of the Paris Climate Agreement. It has been a real challenge making this COP a reality because of COVID-19. COP26 was originally scheduled to take place in November 2020, but of course, due to the pandemic, had to be moved forward a year. There have been many concerns in the climate community that this delay has slowed momentum and provided an excuse for countries' inaction. In addition, determining the appropriate modalities for this event has been contentious. For a long time, it was not clear if the event would take place in person or online, and developing countries expressed very valid concerns that their voices would not be heard in an online format. When the decision was made to go ahead with an event that is in-person format, the United Nations and the United Kingdom promised inclusive participation, but putting that into practice logistically has proven difficult. Just today, I saw on Twitter several participants and negotiators who've been waiting on visas for more than a month and are not certain that they'll be able to attend at all. A lot is riding on this conference, and it remains to be seen if countries will rise to the occasion. Okay, so let's look at the big issues that are on the table. First is the ambition mechanism. So I've spoken about this in some of my past videos, but essentially the Paris Agreement was negotiated with a process for increasing ambition. The backstory here is that the emission reduction commitments that countries made in 2015 were not sufficient for keeping climate change below 1.5 degrees, or even 2.5 degrees for that matter. But it was the best that could be achieved at that time, and we wanted an agreement, so the negotiators put in a mechanism that would allow for a 5-year cycle to enhance ambition. The idea being that every 5 years, countries would review their commitments and make them stronger. The Paris Agreement was, of course, adopted in 2015, and therefore 2020 was meant to be the first year for new, more ambitious commitments. The delay did slow this process, but to date, 115 of the 191 parties to the Paris Agreement have submitted their new commitments. Unfortunately, several key players did not increase their ambition with these submissions. notably Australia, Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, New Zealand, Russia, Singapore, Switzerland, and Vietnam. A synthesis report issued in September 2021 by the UNFCCC found that we could expect greenhouse gas emissions to decrease by about 12% in 2030 compared to 2010 under the current commitments that have been put forward. However, this is far from what is required to limit global average temperature increases. To keep us at 1.5 degrees Celsius, we would need reductions of 45% by 2030. And to keep us at 2 degrees Celsius, we would need a 25% reduction by 2030. So again, that's 12% that we anticipate with the current commitments and 25 or 45% that's required, a pretty big gap. Another interesting dynamic of ambition is conditional commitments. Many developing countries have made commitments that can only be achieved with adequate support from developed countries, and this is why climate finance is going to play a big role in COP26 as well. To be totally blunt, and this is just my opinion, one thing that I find quite troubling in this whole discussion of ambition is the blatant pushback from so many countries to act, even though we have heard over and over again how crucial it is to act urgently and at scale. This year alone, there have been several groundbreaking reports that have made the need to act extremely clear, yet the BBC just reported that documents have surfaced showing countries' official positions on some of these issues, and they are disturbing and troubling and unfortunately not surprising at all because they align directly with the national economic interests of the countries who are making those positions. For example, Australia and India are pushing back on calls for the discontinuation of coal use. Saudi Arabia, Japan, China, and Norway have all pushed back against the idea of ending fossil fuel use. Brazil and Argentina push back against calls for eating less meat. And Switzerland, Australia, and the US are pushing back on calls for more climate financing for developing countries. But it's not all bad. I do want to leave this section on a somewhat positive note by saying that there are more and more countries that continue to make pledges for reaching net zero by mid-century. Just this week, Saudi Arabia announced net zero by 2060, following Russia, who recently announced the same, and the UAE, who announced net zero by 2050. In the blog, I have included a link to a full tracker of net zero commitments that show the progress on that front. Of course, action now is worth way more than commitments for decades away, but at this point, I feel like I'm taking what I can get. Issue number 2, climate finance. I mentioned this briefly already, but another issue we need to watch closely is climate finance. In 2009, countries set a goal of mobilizing $100 billion per year to help countries with less means develop in a way that is sustainable and aligns with the Paris Agreement and for climate adaptation. In 2019, countries were $20 billion short of their goal, and there have been calls on these countries to make higher contributions in the future to make up for the shortfalls of the past. But as I'm sure you can guess, this is heavily contested by many nations. Another nuance to the conversation is that countries are also debating how much money should be given to climate change adaptation versus mitigating CO2 emissions. These will be key and difficult points of negotiation during COP26. And it's worth mentioning that climate finance is often seen as a proxy for overall commitment. In other words, where countries put their money shows what's important to them. So if we get a weak outcome on finance, it can have ripple effects on the other issues that are being discussed. Issue number 3, Article 6. One of the most complex issues to be negotiated at COP is Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which relates to finalizing rules around international carbon markets. This particular item has been on the agenda since the Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015 and was meant to be resolved in 2019 at COP25, but no agreement was achieved. It remains a contentious issue with different countries having various views on how the big questions should be answered. 3 big issues that are still outstanding around carbon markets are how you prevent double counting of credits, determining how credits under the Kyoto Protocol can be applied to the Paris Agreement, and finding how markets can support adaptation finance. Issue number 4, loss and damage. Loss and damage is a unique concept in the climate change arena. We often think about adaptation, which is how countries will change their systems and society gradually to cope with rising temperatures. But loss and damage is a distinct concept focused on the harm caused by climate change events, whether they be disasters or those that occur slowly over time. For example, loss of property by a natural disaster is something that happens instantly, whereas forced migration of people because of loss of their livelihoods over time happens slowly. In the negotiations, loss and damage discussions will focus on two things: technical assistance and, again, finance. At COP25 in Madrid, negotiators agreed to set up a body that would provide technical and scientific advice to countries on loss and damage. This is referred to as the Santiago Network on Loss and Damage, the SNLD. At COP26, more details will be determined around its scope, modalities, and operations. However, the big outstanding question, once again, is financing. I've mentioned it again and again, but finance is always a thorny topic, so it's hard to imagine much progress will be made on that particular aspect of loss and damage at COP26. Issue number 5, enhanced transparency framework. The final issue I want to touch on is a little administrative, but it's important nonetheless. The Enhanced Transparency Framework lays out how countries should report on their climate mitigation, adaptation, and the support that they receive. It aims to hold countries accountable for their climate commitments and create more transparency in the system overall. Pending decisions at this COP include the details over the tables and formats that countries will use to track and report. I know it's super detailed, but these things matter if we want to have consistency in the system. And finally, I spoke with some friends of mine at Youngos, which is the youth constituency of the UNFCCC, and I asked if there were any other issues that they are tracking because they follow the negotiation process so closely and are some of the best versed people on these topics that I know. So I'd like to thank Marie-Claire and Hita for giving me this. They noted 3 very interesting further points that they're watching. First, the food system is becoming a more important part of the climate discussion. The Cornevia joint work on agriculture decision was landmark and was negotiated in June, and it recognizes the unique potential of agriculture in tackling climate change. Youngos expects to see more issues related to agriculture on the agenda of this and future COPs. They also noted that the first global stocktake is now underway from 2021 to 2023. Now, the stocktake is a process that assesses the world's collective progress towards achieving the purpose of the Paris Agreement and its long-term goals. It engages many stakeholder groups in the assessment and will take multiple years, so Youngos is participating in that, as are other constituencies. And finally, they noted that ACE, which stands for Action for Climate Empowerment and includes issues of participation, education, training, and awareness, is expected to have a new work program adopted at COP26 because their first work program has now expired. And that's it. That's all I have for you. Thank you so much for being here. I really hope that you're planning to follow the outcomes of COP. Even though I am a little skeptical, I do hope that for the sake of this planet, we can push forward and our world leaders will do the right thing. Don't forget to check out the blog posts where you can find links to my research, articles where you can learn more, and a few organizations who work in this space that you can follow or support if you're into that sort of thing. If you learned something in this video, give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more of me nerding out on climate and sustainability. That's it for now. See you in the next one, and until then, keep fighting the good fight. Bye!